Good afternoon, everyone. Firstly, I'd like to thank the organisers for inviting me along, just to give a bit of a brief insight to how historic England look at and look after our cultural heritage within England. The scene you can see behind me is the scene of Windsor Castle fire back in November 1992. The fire began in the Queen's private chapel at 11:15 in the morning, when a curtain was ignited by a halogen spotlight that was pressed up against it, caused by contractors on site. A common theme within fires within the UK for our cultural heritage. Now, 225 firemen fought the blaze using 39 fire appliances. Greater London had only suffered one other fire requiring more than 30 appliances to be present since 1973. And fire services across the counties attended, both London, Buckinghamshire, Surrey, Oxfordshire, and also Royal Berkshire also attended. What you can see now is this is St George's Hall just after the fire, and also this is St George's Hall as it is now after restoration. Now, the Queen footed the bill for this building, and the cost of repair at that time was £36.5 million, which equates to nowadays to around about £100 million in today's figures. Now, following this fire, this is where we started to get into what we're going to do about our cultural heritage. And so Alan Bailey was commissioned to produce a report following this loss, and that gave us then guidelines on how we actually deal with fires for nowadays, to balance fire safety requirements with the specialists of interest of our heritage in mind. Now, this formed the basis of how all the legislation with England started to form together to look after our cultural heritage. Now, when we look at our heritage, all our important heritage buildings are given listings initially by the people that I work for, Historic England. The listing, scheduling, registering for the protection of buildings, monuments, parks, gardens, battlefields and wreck sites are all forms of designation. Now, once that designation is done, that designation is an act of identifying the most important parts of our heritage, so they can receive special protection and make sure that our history can be enjoyed, not by us at the present, but also for future generations to come, because we're just custodians of that building for a period of time. That building's going to be there years after we're long gone. All of these sites are brought together under the National Heritage List for England. Now, all these buildings and structures must come under some form of legislation, and it mainly falls under the Planning for Listing Buildings and Conservation Areas Act 1990. And underneath where you see the Act there itself, there is a website of our website we can go, which details really about how we designate and what that selection criteria is. There's also some recent legislation which has just been revised, and it sets out a government plan and policy for England, which is the National Plan and Policy Framework 2019. Now, its purpose is to ensure that the heritage built environment is always considered during any development, to make sure that we either conserve that building or enhance the environment from where it sits. The UK is a big country, relatively, not as big as Brazil, and it's made up of several countries within that, England being one of them. Historic England, Cadw for Wales, and also Historic Environment Scotland. They all have principles of selection for listing of buildings, and what they must take into consideration is they must consider initially the architectural interest, where all buildings which are nationally important must, for the interest of their architectural design, decoration and craftsmanship, are also important examples of particular building types, techniques and significant plan forms. They must consider the historical interests. This includes buildings which illustrate important aspects of the national social, economic, cultural or military history. and also it also will include persons that may have resided in those buildings that becomes an interest to the country. And there are other factors as well, lots of other different factors such as group value, fixtures and features of a building, and also buildings within its curtilage, because once a building is listed, it's the curtilage of the building, so all other buildings within that area are also listed as well. And also the character appearance of conservation areas, because we can have many, many areas which are locally listed as far as conservation areas or have local importance. So, I think I've gone one too many. Oh, no, I haven't. There we are. Okay, surprisingly, and you would think of England being a country going back many, many centuries, we don't actually know the number of historic buildings that we have, because the way that listings work, it can be one single entry, can be a complete street, or it can be milestones, gateposts, styles. There are so many different listings, we don't actually know how many buildings we got. But we think it's round about 500,000, so 500,000 listed buildings within the UK. Is that running out of power? I think we'll just let the technical man deal with this first. Yep. Okay, back on track. So, heritage buildings are broken down basically into three principal grades. A grade 1, which is buildings which are of exceptional special interest and sometimes considered internationally important. These make up around about 2.5% of the total building stock. Grade 2 star buildings are particularly important, of buildings of more than special interest, and they account for around about 5.5% nationally. The rest of it, about 92%, are grade 2, and they are considered really, really worthy of preserving, and these are the buildings that are mostly owned by homeowners themselves. And it's a myth that in England people tend to think that it's only the outside of the building which is listed, but it's everything that is listed within that building. And also then you have locally listed and also conservation areas where the local authority takes control of those buildings. You can see from the graph here that the age of the building and the fewer that are surviving it makes it, and you can see the percentage that we have there. You look at before 1600, 15%. These buildings that have been around for centuries. You look at the 17th century, it makes up about 18% of the total of heritage listed buildings. 18th century and 19th century, you start to get to see a greater degree of the percentage of the buildings that are there. And then you start to get to the area of after 1945 that the percentage is getting down lower and lower with, and also then you start looking at 1945 and after that it's like 0.2%, and the building would have to have, because it's not been around for that long culturally, it would have to have some form of significant interest or a significant design for it to be able to be classed as listed. So we mentioned before about the buildings are covered by the Planning, Listed Building and Conservation Areas Act, but there are other legislation as well that concern the sites that we're talking about. These are scheduling archaeological sites. These are covered by Ancient Monuments and Architectural Areas Act 1979. And you can see the list there of protecting wreck sites comes under an act, and also registering of parts has an act applied to it as well. And all of these are designed to protect that site from any development. So then when you start looking at other pieces of legislation, some time ago, the Department for Communities and Local Government decided that they need to start to make fire and rescue services more aware of making sure that they consider heritage within their own fire service plans. So this policy and guidance was issued back in 2008, and this was to ensure that all heritage buildings should include heritage within their own fire and rescue services integrated risk management plans, mainly because the buildings themselves face same risks as other buildings with the same fire safety legislation in force as their modern counterparts. But when you look at it, all these heritage buildings were built way before building regulations came into force, way before the modern standards that are required for a building that is built in today's environment. And that's where we have, because these buildings were designed to breathe with letting the air move around it, both for heating and also for cooling. And when you start looking at making a building breathe, you then start to introduce into it, or it's already there, voids and ducts, areas where fire can spread throughout a building. And when you're looking at a heritage building, that can be quite dramatic and very, very quick. Right, there are several pieces of legislation that require the fire and rescue service as well to take into account fire safety in heritage buildings. The main one being is the Fire and Rescue Services Act, Part 2, which deals with the functions of fire and rescue service authorities. And then there are 47 fire authorities within England, so it's quite a lot, and they all operate very, very differently. Section 6 deals with fire safety, which is really important for the heritage, which requires a fire and rescue service to promote fire safety in the area, to provide information to prevent fires, to give enough advice when requested, and that advice also is free, and how to prevent fires and restrict the spread of buildings and other property. Section 7 deals with firefighting, requiring the fire and rescue service to make sure they've got adequate provision of extinguishing fires in their area, protecting life and property, secure personnel, services and equipment to be able to deal with those, dispatching the fire engines to the actual scene, and also to training personnel to ensure they're at the correct level to be able to deal with those heritage built environment issues. Part of Section 7 as well is an area called a 7.2D, which gives the fire and rescue services the power to actually go into a building and just survey it to make sure that they're aware and be familiar with it should they get an incident within that building. And Section 11 deals with all other different types of issues that they're looking at, which is anything that is happening on that building. It gives them special powers to go into that building as well. What you see next on there is the Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order, which came out in 2005. An important piece of legislation because it brought together all the fire legislation that was available at one time in England, which was a huge amount. We're talking about over 100 pieces of legislation, and it brought it all under one banner. Unfortunately, the 2005 Fire Safety Order only deals with saving life. It doesn't talk about anywhere about protecting property at all within the fire safety law within England, which I think is really, really, really disappointing. You also see on there Civil Contingencies Act. That was designed really to improve the UK's ability to deal with the consequences of dealing with a major incident, mainly so that emergency services and also those Class 1 responders, which would be local authorities, highways for roads, etc., to work together under joint principles to protect a building should an incident occur. So they've all got to work together, they've all got to understand what each other does and how they're going to resolve an incident adequately. There's also a minor piece of legislation which is called the National Heritage Act, and these were just to deal with certain museums within London to ensure that they had a board of trustees to look after heritage issues. The fire safety order as well, there's an Article 30 within it, which is there's a duty laid upon people to ensure that they consult with the fire authority should they have to carry out any building control work on the buildings. This is important because there are lots of times when those building works which are carried out on a building can have a dramatic effect on how the building would operate in a fire situation. And there are a couple of other little bits within ADB, which is Approved Document B of Building Regulations, which mainly deals that they give leeway for a heritage building to not comply with building regulations, which is a strange situation where you can give a building consent not to actually comply with building regulations. And also there's some guides within the CLG, which Appendix C, which gives additional guidance for people to make sure they comply with the fire safety order. Okay. Moving on then, well, when we look at heritage in the economy, a survey was done by the Oxford Economics Report, which said that 192 million heritage trips were made within England in 2014. So Historic England decided that what they would do was actually carry out their own survey, and what they found was that £20.2 million was contributed to the gross value added to the UK, with over 459,000 jobs attributed to it. This is both direct, indirect and also induced. And heritage tourism therefore supported over 2% of the gross value added. And this accounts for 1 in 100 people that are employed. Now, there are no European, there are no European fire certificates available, and in the UK, Sweden has a very good system for collecting the facts. I see Erica's at the back there. And in fact, no countries produce no data at all. And UK statistics are most reliable. Cost 17 did a research some time ago, back in 2002, and they estimated that it would be about 120 fires in the UK every year. The Home Office are the ones that request for fire and rescue services to give them data on statistics, but the Home Office do not collect and request any data on heritage buildings at all. So basically, we don't even know where they're occurring in the UK. This is just a chart. I won't go through this one because time is pressing. We need to move on. But basically, it just says that over the last 10 years, fire statistics hasn't really changed. When you look at the graph, the middle and the bottom one, the amount of fires that were occurring in all these properties are about levelled out. So the thing is now, can we prevent them in the first place? My reason is yes, because we need to do more intervention with them to prevent the fires from occurring. 2018, this is how many losses we had to cultural buildings within the UK at 2018. 350 fires in heritage buildings. 17 of them were Grade 1, 23 Grade 2 star, 205 in Grade 2 buildings, and also 79 in locally listed buildings, which is a phenomenal amount, which is almost 3 times what they actually estimate that fires are occurring in the UK. These are the causes. Lots and lots of causes of why we're having fires. Deliberate, you can see quite high, electrical. Cooking, unknown. Sparks from a wood burner, quite common in thatched buildings within the UK. Sunlight, and then one of the biggest issues, contractors on site. And when we're having fires caused by contractors, the results can be absolutely devastating. So what are we doing about as far as Historic England? Well, we're trying to do our best by, we make sure that our website carries a lot of information, both on technical issues, both for emergency response plans and also for fire advice. And on there we carry lots of templates, which are free to download for anybody. This is an emergency response plan template, which within that, this is for owners and occupiers to build into their plans of what they're going to do should an incident occur on your premises. And from that, within these templates, what you can produce is priority list sheets. And this is an example of a priority list sheet. I like them. I was 37 years in the fire service. I think they're really good. And because it's simple, and firemen are simple people, I can say that because I was one, okay? You lot can't, but I can say that. And as you can see from there, it gives you a plan of the building, where that room is located. It gives you a blow-up of the building to show where the priority item is, a brief description of the item itself that you want rescued. Also, there's a space there to say how many people you need to remove that artefact, and also any specialist tools that you need to get it out. And these are available for firefighters when they actually turn up on the scene, should you have an incident, so you can remove your artefacts quickly and safely. Now, Historic England run a salvage and disaster recovery course. It's over 3 days. There are 2 people in the room that has attended that course, I'm pleased to say. And over those 3 days, what we do is we try to teach people to understand, to organise resources in an emergency, how to work safely in emergency situations. We give them experience in gaining practical knowledge of working in salvage teams, and understand how to treat and look after damaged artefacts, and more importantly, how to work with the fire and rescue services should they actually turn up at their premises, to understand their command and control systems and how it all operates. Hopefully now, it should be a short video, and then that's the end of my presentation.
Each year, a substantial number of historic buildings and historic assets are seriously damaged by fire and floods. Be it art collections, important artifacts, or the buildings themselves, pieces of history risk becoming lost forever.
The aim of the course is to teach delegates to consider what to do in the event of an incident occurring on their premises.
I'm a conservator, it's part of what I trained for, to do this sort of thing, but I haven't done very many practical drills, and certainly nothing with the fire service.
The tutors for the course are a variety of people from the historic sector. The fire service also teach on the course.
We've had conservators from the National Trust and English Heritage, as well as independent conservators. So you get the whole mix and you get both sides, and I think that also works very well.
Everyone's brought a lot to the table, you know, every single person is sort of a specialist in their field.
The course combines both theory and practice, with classroom sessions designed to break down what happens in an emergency, through to learning the skills they'll need if a fire, flood or disaster happens on their site.
Being able to use the firehouse means that there's a lot more scope for the exercises. It really gives that opportunity to put all the sort of theory into practice.
It is the best means of learning. You learn the theory and you put it into practice. It throws up a lot more questions, which is great to consider.
It's okay reading something or somebody telling you something, but actually physically doing it, it tends to, you retain that information longer, I think. It reinforces into your head that what we've taught you theory-wise does work.
After preparing for it through the classroom and practical sessions, the course culminates in a full-scale simulation of a real emergency.
We up the scale, really.
So there's a bit of tension. Okay, yeah, it's going to be daunting. You're going to have huge amounts of adrenaline pumping through you, because I think you're all slightly nervous. You know, you're sort of drilling for your worst nightmare, really.
It's been incredibly exciting. I can't think of anywhere else where you'd get to have this kind of experience.
Obviously I was here, but I was thinking, what would it be like where I am, and what would I do, where would I be in the action plan? You know, I didn't necessarily think about that beforehand.
And it gave you real insight into what it's like for the fire crews. If we know what we're doing and we know what the fire service are doing and we work together thoroughly and in conjunction, we can save valuable time and we can save valuable things.
We've learned how our actions would dovetail with the fire service and what we need to do to get our collections and our people out safely.
There's no other course like it in the country, and you're definitely going to take away a lot of skills and be better prepared, more confident to deal with an incident should one occur on their premises.
I'm going to go back and I'm going to really look at my plan. Is it effective?
So there's a lot to put into practice when I get back. I'd say absolutely do it. It's very, very good value in terms of the amount of in-depth teaching that you get.
I'd say give it a go. You get to meet lots of fantastic people from other institutions, other organisations. That's been very interesting. It's the only place that you can really, really experience what it's like to be in an emergency scenario, handling these priceless artefacts and working with your colleagues.
So, as you can see, that's a course for when the incident occurs, but what we need to do is we need to prevent these incidents from occurring in the first place, because otherwise we're just going to have scenarios like this. It's just a quick run through. 2010 in Dartmouth, Western Supermare 2011, Sydenham House 2012, the Cumin Museum in London, Glasgow School of Arts. I know that Chris is doing a big talk about that tomorrow on the Glasgow School of Arts. Clarendon Park 2015. That's going to be costing around about £75 to £100 million to repair. This was the cause of the problem, a distribution board, an electrical grub switch which was incorrectly fitted. It was a design fault. The Royal Clarence Hotel in Exeter in 2016. Parnham House 2017, which was a deliberate act. And that's only just been sold recently, so it's been open to the elements since 2017. Hate to think what that building looks like now. And then again, going back to the Glasgow School of Arts in 2018. That's me. Okay, that's the property that I went to. It was my last fire that I went to as a fireman. That's what it used to look like. That's what it looked like when I turned up. It's a thatched property, and that's what it looked like the next day. So let's look after these heritage buildings. Thank you, and that's my dog.